time is now 5:45, and I'd like to call the policy committee meeting to order.
I move that we call the meeting to order.
Okay, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 2-0. All right. Before seeking adoption of the agenda, I would like to motion to amend the agenda as printed. But
I move that we motion to amend the agenda as printed.
Wait a minute, what's the,
What were your amendments?
yeah, what? as
So yeah,
printed?
but so I'm going to amend the minutes as printed. So it's not a I wrote this down, but it's gonna be a lot. So I'll read it and then I'll give it to Ms. Thomas. Is all reading. So the amendments I wish to make are to the 4.0 discussion items. 4.1 is to be discussion of self-governance. 4.2 is to discuss open and closed campus. 4.3 is to discuss to have student handbook update, which may or may not happen. And 4.4 is discussion of policy for the alternative education's transition plan. For 5.0, to discuss MSBA policy revisions for reading.
So that's gonna go under future agenda items, so that I
Yes.
understand. So it's really gonna be,
It's
a 5.0.
gonna become 5.0.
Yes.
It's gonna become 5.0. He's
Okay.
taking away future, he's changing the number of future agenda items.
Well, that
Or you want it to be,
I want that to be 5.1.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
So
gotcha,
you want what to be 5.1, I'm sorry?
The MSBA
okay,
MSBA revisions.
okay.
So that's I guess that's my motion.
Okay. All right, I move that we amend the agenda as printed to state that item 4.0.
We already did that.
Yeah.
Oh, that was part of your motion?
No, we don't have to add anything to closed session.
Yeah, you can, they can, when they get to it, make a motion to go into closed session, or you all can amend the agenda to add closed session as a
And
6.
so onto that motion.
7.0.
Yeah, onto that motion, adding the 7.0 that we moved to we go into closed session.
Thank you.
All right, I move that we amend the agenda to state item 4.1, self-governance, 4.2, open and closed campus, 4.3, 4.4, the alternative education transition plan, to discuss that. And under item 5.0, we want to add MSBA revisions. And then under the item, and then move into closed session after the meeting is adjourned.
I'll say. So, President Briggs,
Aye.
Vice President Reagan,
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right. Moving to 3.0, approval of the minutes. Have board members have policy committee members been able to review previous minutes?
Yes, I have. Yes,
We're over.
Yeah,
we're
you're
over.
Yeah, I was like that's what I was
I've had an opportunity to review the minutes from the February 4th, 2021 meeting.
Okay. Been able to? All right, so seeking a motion to approve the February 4th policy committee meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the February 3.0
Any discussion? No? Okay. President Briggs,
Aye.
Vice President Reagan,
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Moving on to discussion items. 4.1, self-governance. So, has the committee been able to read the policies that were provided via email regarding policy KNAJ, KB, BBF, GBCB?
Yes, I've had an opportunity to review, 4.1 all the way down to, 4.5.
Okay. Any discussion regarding, because the reason why this was put on the agenda was to ensure that we are providing ourselves with board governance, so I wanted to ensure that this policy committee was able to review these policies. As we've had discussion as of late of possible or alleged policy violations, and I want to ensure that we are reviewing policies so that it can assist with our self-governance. So the only reason for this discussion item was to provide space for the discussion based on these the policies in which I provided. So is there any discussion after you've been able to review these policies?
Well,
Go ahead, I'll let you go.
well, I just wanted to get some clarification on, I got the board, the staff conduct. I just need a little bit clarification of the need to revisit the staff conduct, part of this policy, of what we're talking about today.
So, although we are board members, we are also still considered to be a part of the staff of Hickman. And with staff conduct, a lot of the issues in which teachers, principals, administrative office are held to, where they will possibly be subjected to I don't want to use the word reprimand, but whether it be under investigation for this policy, I want to ensure that we also are mirroring the same type of staff conduct that we're asking for staff members of our district to imply. As we are at the top and it trickles down, it's important that if we have the expectations of the staff conduct of, say, a teacher, that it would also apply to us.
Well, one of my major comments is that the advantage of seeing all these policies on here, especially with the April election, this would afford the incoming board an opportunity to have these policies presented to them in such fashion, and give them an opportunity to weigh in, buy in, and be fully vested in. That is one of the advantages to looking at these policies from my perspective as the current president.
Okay. The one thing I will bring up when it comes to this is policy BF. BF talks about the annual review of board policies. And with this, also with my new tenure, as well as being appointed to this chair of this policy committee, what I'd like to move into April with is asking administration to create, well, not even so much as asking administration to create a schedule, but rather that on a monthly basis that we review the letters of each policy, so that when we come, we are actually providing real review and revision of anything. This is to ensure that our policies are kept up to date.
Oh, yeah, the BF policy, the
Yeah.
annual review. From my understanding, I believe these policies come up how many times a year? We take the MSBA recommendations and then vest through the superintendent at that time, and then from the superintendent back to the Board of Education for the final clarification and final review of those policies. At this point, I don't see it being a problem at this particular time. It's just a matter of the policy committee continuing with this mission to manage policy.
Oh, absolutely. And to speak to that, it's just, the idea is to create a schedule so that MSBA reviews their policies and the policies in which, and the revisions they would like for districts to make, and they give it to every district. But as we've already kind of proven, there are policies that are unique to Hickman. So it's imperative that we look at our policies and make sure that they're up to date, to see if there's anything that, like, the purpose of this policy committee needs to be able to review the current policies that we do have, so that we are able to remain competent and up to date on the policies. And what I'm speaking to is more in the sense of April A, April, May B, June C, like, going through each policy to the point where we're able to review the policies that we have, so that when it comes up, the MSBA has revisions, that we have also made revisions to keep our policies.
Are you bringing forth that recommendation as that schedule?
I'm keeping up, yeah, I'm bringing forward that recommendation as scheduled.
What is that again? Just can't, so I can write it in my notes.
No, you're okay. So just.
That was my question, is there a recommendation?
So the recommendation is to ensure that through policy BF, that we review we're able to review all of our policies on an annual basis, and that it'll come through the policy committee in which these policies are reviewed
Monthly
monthly.
and in order?
And a schedule will be provided, so it will be in order.
Let me interject on a couple of things. I don't
No, fine.
want to generally interject on your dialogue, but there are a couple of things that I do want to clarify
Yeah.
for you. First off, the policy on staff conduct applies to the staff, so it doesn't apply
Right.
to you all as directors. If there are provisions in this that you want to, as a policy committee, review, look at, and say, this would be a good thing for our board to do as well, then what you would want to do is look at those and either figure out whether or not they need to go in your ethics policy or in your communication plan that you've approved, or or if you want to create a whole new policy that deals with board conduct.
Can we, you have another comment? Because
I did have another one, but if you want to, but it's on something different.
Yeah, so if you're finished with that one, and it brings me back, because I was just trying to get a framework of where we're going. And so with that, because I still have that right here, I was just gonna go back and ask for clarification. I do want to caution, as a governing body of the board, I mean, I just think about that, and it's just with a caution. Whatever revisions that I think the board should be held accountable for should be part of our ethics. I mean, that would be my recommendation, because we don't get a pay to the order.
Right.
We're not protected under the same guidelines of staff and
Agreed.
faculty and administration. So I don't think that when it comes to legal and compliance issues, we're not under the same umbrella. We're not. So I would, if I was a board member coming on and you're holding me accountable for these same type of things, I would want some kind of stipend of some sort, some type of an incentive, because it makes it a little, faulty to me.
So
that's just my opinion.
No, that's perfect, because the incentive is that any violations of board members, any violations of any of the policies or ethics or that pertain to the board we're subject to censorship from the full board. In other words, the full board can sit here in a public setting state that they do not approve of the person's conduct, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I have one more thing.
Go ahead.
And I only make these comments because at the end of the day, everything should be done with a human touch. And you're asking people to volunteer. I don't know how many hours I met this year so far. If I had to guess, probably about 400 hours of my time. The the censorship, I think it's gonna be important to really have a conversation with the board about the why behind this conversation.
Yeah. And we can,
The why is gonna be very important, and have you got volunteers giving a lot of time to do things. I mean, your points are very valid, but I would really look at strengthening that board ethics policy and also really reviewing that in our retreat, and maybe looking at the board ethics policy quarterly. I think the board ethics, the board communication policy that many of us do not follow. I mean, you can't pick my issue that I'm having with these policies is that we can't pick and choose which ones we're going to abide by.
agreed.
And I think that should be, part of the overarching conversation. Board members can't pick and choose which ones are more favorable to them, or what's favorable to Reagan, or what may be favorable to me. So the overarching thing to me is how the board communication plan, the board ethics is a great place to start. The role of a board member, those things have to be done before we start, this. And so I would recommend that my recommendation would be at some point in the near future that these things be added to the retreat
So,
agenda as well.
so one of the things that was discussed, like even with the schedule going by A, B, C, D, E, F, G, per month, like April being A, and then kind of May being B, et cetera, that would be the second month in which the new board would come in which board governance is B. So being able to review those ethics, that communication agreement, those roles and everything will come within the first month of the actual person serving. So, so that this also provides not just an open session that allows those board members to actually understand their governance as well as their role, as well as the ethics, but to know that also that even that these policies are up for review to ensure that there is nothing that needs to be changed or amended about them, or does. Yes, sir.
Well, going back to piggyback off of this, right now we have a whole lot of things as far as conduct that board members are not doing.
Right.
Each and every day. One thing is we have people that haven't finished their things that the state told us to do.
Mm-hmm.
We have some that don't even know what our schools look like unless it's a newspaper that comes up there or it's on TV.
Right.
So we have a lot of things, just to limit it to just one thing. We're asking, kind of like what President Briggs said, you're asking me to give up something where the people, this is something that our people, what our job is oversight, as always, to keep up with what's going on and to say, hey, look, I want to just limit on one thing, then you're trying to say that then if that's the case, you might as well strike a lot of it out,
Right.
because we have to agree.
Mm-hmm.
We have some that you're never going to see doing anything. And that's terrible, because our job is to advocate also for our students and the staff out there. But how can you advocate and then you say, oh, I don't want you to talk, but you haven't even been anywhere. You haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, going back to what she stated, that's something to bring out in the retreat when we should have probably have done. And also bring it all together, because conduct, putting your time in, I think I done passed all y'all's hours. Probably 365 hours and plus, keep on going. No offense to anybody.
No, none taken.
So I don't want anybody to say that. But as far as hours, I've put in a lot of hours since I've been here. Whether it's going to a funeral, whether it's going to the graduation, whether it's going to a program, whether it's, but for someone to sit there and say, hey, I'm going to use me because I can't do that. Mr.
Right.
Reagan, I don't like what you said about what's going on here and there. And I'm looking at you like, I haven't seen you done anything since you've been here.
See,
And that's not fair.
that would be more reactionary.
But I'm just saying. You see
And
what
I
I'm
agree.
saying?
I agree with you.
I
I
gotta
don't
measure.
want us to stay on
Yeah,
this
I know.
topic for too long, but
Yeah.
here, this is
I want us
to
to
answer
measure
both
it
of your
all.
questions. The aspect is, like, these policies were here as revision, were put under this one because there have been alleged violations of the policy. Strike, staff conduct
Okay.
for the board. Like, just saying, based on what you pretty much conveyed when it came to staff conduct. Now, the reason why I had these policies reviewed is because these are the ones that are of currently. Now, the recommendation that I am making is that we create a schedule that reviews all policies in a timely manner, so that not so much in the sense that it's to reprimand anybody, but if there are any policy violations that actually occur, those policy violations will be referenced to the censure. That's it. In other words, you cannot censure anyone just because you have an opinion about what they think. But rather, if there is a violation of policy that is per this policy, I motion to censure should be the way in which it should be done.
Have you seen any other boards do that?
Yes.
In which areas?
When I trained at the MSBA, I specifically spoke to Phyllis Barks about the aspect of motion to censure, as well as, and the recommendations are the ones that her recommendations are what I'm recommending here,
Okay.
which is that in order to censure, it's not based on opinion or how someone feels about anybody else, but based on the fact of a policy violation. And it should be censure should be done with reference to that violation, not to the specifics of the policy. Now, on the aspect of review, the aspect of reviewing the policy is to ensure that the policies are competent and up to date to what we're trying to achieve as a district. Because there are policies that are, if you have reviewed any of these policies, there are policies that are over 5 years old, that some of the revisions that the MSBA has made is not necessarily ones that cater to us. And it's not even so much as the revisions that they're looking at. So what I'm saying is I want us to remain competent and to be able to self-govern through our policy, not through opinion, not through the opinion of what somebody says, but rather through the policies in which we're supposed to govern everyone else.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. I just want to piggyback what you stated too. Phyllis Bark, that's her opinion. Phyllis Bark is what she facilitated to you.
Right.
But what might facilitate what she might see is probably totally different than what we're going to see. Because see, she's not around us every day.
Okay.
So we have to also take that in her opinion. That's her opinion of what she told you that she might want to sit and do. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, and I understand where you're coming from. An opinion and a recommendation are two different things. This was recommended in the sense that it was recommended to ensure that the board was able to govern oneself. Now,
Who
Who recommended that? Right.
Phyllis
Bark, that's what I'm saying.
Phyllis Barks has not had a conversation with me about any recommendations.
It wasn't.
As the current board chair, I speak to her pretty frequently.
I understand
And
that.
none of these recommendations
That's
based
fine.
on our board communication, policy, that one that we just approved, this is the first of my knowledge.
I'm having a hard time. Maybe I'm having a hard
Maybe
time.
I'm maybe I'm
Missing,
confused.
what you're
Yeah, I
trying to
think
say.
you guys are.
'Cause
So this is what happened, because I think you guys
Yeah,
have the
I might-
play-by-play
Yeah,
to
do the
understand.
baseline.
No, I'm, you
Hold
know
on,
what,
time
I
out.
do wanna be clear that we at
Point-
6:18.
And I'm trying to move this
Okay.
along.
Mhm.
As chair of this committee, I'm trying to move this along, but let me clarify with a definite line. I went and asked a question to Phyllis Barks. I got a response as a recommendation of what actions should be taken place if I choose to do so. But what I'm bringing to the board, not just the board president or vice president, but also to anyone who is watching, is that the board needs to self-govern by policy. In which the board that does not self-govern by policy, we should censure in disapproval of the person who is violating that policy. If you do not do that, then you are allowing the person to continue to violate that policy by not holding them accountable. The one thing that we do not do as a board is hold each other accountable for policy violations. There is no reprimand. There's no reprimand for us to have. But the one thing that we do have is our voice is one. So if we see a blatant policy violation, we should be able to speak on it, whether it be from a teacher to a principal to an administrator, which we do every day, all day, and it should also come to us. We should also hold ourselves accountable. But with that, if there's no more discussion,
Well, I just don't feel like right now, with the new board coming on, and with this first time hearing what Phyllis Bart has presented to you.
It's not about Phyllis
I'm
Barnes.
just saying what she's presented to you.
It's not about her.
That didn't ever come up with the board ethics in the first place, you know. That should have been something brought up then, and I don't think we brought it up, and just to hear it now.
I understand that this is a recommendation, but this can be done at any time. Anytime, any board member can censure another board member based on policy alone. What I am doing is bringing this to the policy for recommendation, so that we can bring it to the board as a whole. But regardless, this will go to the board as a whole. Whether it's through the recommendation of this committee or not, this is something that you should know. That as we move forward, there is always the possibility
For censorship.
For censorship.
Oh.
So, go ahead.
Censorship.
I'm sorry, and I don't like to interject, but I want to just make some clarifications so that I understand.
Yes.
Where you guys are headed. So, I think part of what I'm hearing, and I wanted to clarify your question, President Briggs, about MSBA review of policy. So, I will confirm with MSBA how they select the policies that they're going to review, and the process that they use. And so, just so that we're all on the same page, all districts that adopt MSBA policies, and most of our surrounding districts are using MSBA policies as their board policies. MSBA conducts annual reviews of those policies, and the number of times that they do that probably varies from year to year. In 2019, they had an A, B, and C series of reviews, and you guys are going to have a C series coming up. So when they make recommendations, all those recommendations go out to districts that have adopted MSBA policies. And it's incumbent upon you all to review those and decide whether or not you want to adopt MSBA's recommendations or not adopt MSBA's recommendations. So I just want to make sure that we got that clarification about how MSBA policies are reviewed. With regard to, because what I'm hearing are two different things.
I'm hearing two different things.
One is a request to create a schedule to review policies regularly.
You are hearing that.
In addition to what MSBA does. And then the other is a discussion about utilizing policy to censure directors. And I'm thinking that it may be better, just from a clarification standpoint, if you don't conflate those conversations and have one conversation about review of policies and whether you all want to adopt a schedule to do that, and then have a separate conversation about how policies are used to censure directors.
Okay. So what I will do is, as the amendments that were made were regarding self-governance, the discussion that we're having has more to do, or the discussion that we've had has been more to do with the act of censorship. We can discuss the recommendation of schedule for policies in April.
Yeah, I think that's probably where we should start. I think I again would caution the conversation of censorship with board members and they haven't had training yet.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I just think that that's something that the review of these policies for effective governance is probably where I would have made a recommendation, but to take censor to me is a negative connotation. And I just, with 3 potential new board members to start out with those kind of conversations is quite embarrassing, for one. And this whole conversation is pretty embarrassing, especially when you're going to be seating 3 new board members. This is training. This should fall under the umbrella of how many times attorneys and superintendents and board members require trainings for board members. As I stated multiple times, that you're not going to get just your PD from MSBA. You're not just going to get your PD from the attorneys and retreats. Board members have an obligation to go get some PD so that they can have multiple tools in their tool belt, and these 4 tools are not the only tools to make an effective governing board. And so I say that, and I'm gonna stand on that. So if we're going to take 4.1 and 4.5, my recommendation will be to have these for initial review during a retreat as professional development and effective board governance. That would be my recommendation. I would definitely scratch the word censorship when a board member is out of their character. That would be my recommendation.
Not to stay on this topic for much longer, but it isn't.
For effective use of our time and
Yeah,
their time.
yeah, but it is important to understand that the motion for censorship is through parliamentary procedure, and it's available at any point, and it has been. Now, the point in which I wish to make when it comes to, and just in that response, was the fact that even with new board members coming on, it is important for them to understand the boundaries of the power in which they have. Now, they will get that through PD, they will get that through retreats, they will get that through the board's, this policy committee's review of the policies in hand. The point in which I tend to make is the fact that for those who are tenured and those who have been here, even those who have only been here for a month, if there is any violation of board policies, they are subjected to censorship. Now, whether that's but here's the deal, whether that is something that we don't want to discuss or not, that is a fact of the availability of the board. By simply stating the fact does not mean that it's going to be used, but the board needs to understand that that is the capability through parliamentary procedure, through policy. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move on to 4.2, which happens to deal with the policies and concern of open and locked campus. Now, 4.2 is open and locked campuses. Now, through previous discussions, there has been, what I would like to do is essentially looking at these policies, looking at the EBCA, the Crisis Intervention Plan, which is provided to us through our security, and the policy JEFA, if there was any recommendations for an amendment to this policy to add anything on from any of the board members, more specifically, possibly not being able to badge into schools during when the campus is closed or during a lockdown.
Well, I just personally think, since we're talking about that, we need to look at, we need to bring the security back in. We might need to look at our whole security part. I don't think this is something that we should even start talking about without Sergeant Dykstra being in here, because there's been several recommendations about how our our lockdowns and procedures have been going. So I think with him being in here, and for all our board members, just me personally, and then you have a new board, I think we really need to look at that. Because our soft lockdowns and hard lock, even if you do disengage a badge, but there's other things like we've brought up before about having keys and little locks inside, like Center has. They got the door, and some of these other schools have locks, whereas the teachers can lock, the substitute can even lock the door. We need to bring all that back up if we're going to talk about that. So I think with this.
So would you say that your recommendation is that we review this with our current security?
Hopefully, I think it's time to really, with everyone. I think that'll be something good since you have new board members. It's time to get this new soft, hard lockdown, how the information goes out, who's at the desk when these things come in, how effective it's been. You need to have some type of stat. We don't never have how effective, how long did it take. Generally, when we all went to school, they had a time when we used to do the tornado drills and all that. Mm-hmm. And then they would say, okay, we made in this type of record time or whatever. Mm-hmm. We need to have some stats. We need to have all that when you're talking about safety. And I'm looking at it at a whole, we need to really revamp that. I think we have gotten kind of complacent a lot. And now since we're here, let's just do the whole overhaul.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that we're complacent. I would say that security is something that is an ongoing thing that should be reviewed on an ongoing basis. So to have Sergeant Dykstra at the table, and the administration will be critical with the Board of Education because they're close to the day-to-day operation.
So then, is anyone seeking a motion for recommendation to have Sergeant Dystra discuss, these two policies?
With the full board,
Yeah,
I think
that's,
that you have it,
So-
and I think once you, I think it would be also good to have, the new, superintendent also needs to be in here. I mean, that's just me, because, and everybody needs to start on a fresh page. That's just me.
so,
I mean, I don't know. What do
so
you think?
is there any
Law,
recommendations
I
for?
don't think that we can make,
Can we do that now, or we need to wait?
We need to.
I have a clarifying question in
Yes,
terms of Sergeant Dykstra's role. I don't feel like he can interpret policy.
I agree.
He can come in and explain safety procedures and provide and answer questions in that area, but I wouldn't invite him, I wouldn't suggest inviting him to interpret policy for the board.
No, I think as far as his part is the procedural aspect of how to carry out what is policy. So he provides the procedure. So the question that I would voice to you guys is,
That's right.
would you like to possibly move this item to the next board meeting and ask him to come and express the procedure of how these policies are carried out?
I'm good with that, Harry.
Okay. Seek a motion.
I move that we move, policy 4.2 to full board for full discussion.
Okay.
I second it.
Is there any further discussion?
Mm.
All right. President Briggs,
Aye.
Vice President Reagan,
Aye.
Chair votes aye. 3-0, motion carries. All right, moving on to what?
I actually thought that
That's
4.1 and,
4.2.
I thought they was together.
I thought they all would be good for full board to review,
Yeah.
especially in that.
Cause that's the public.
And one clarifying point for me in terms of direction for Sergeant Dykstra. So this policy will be on the agenda on
In
March
April.
12th, okay, in April. But he doesn't need to come in April if the board decides that they have follow-up questions, he'll be
Exactly.
invited back in May.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, I will say the new board members, cause you've made reference to including them, they will not have taken the oath at the time of your next meeting.
Right, so then we will,
We'll have to do it in April, May, June.
yeah, so then it will just be brought to the board, just for them to be aware. So that when we have our, May, we'll have clarification, yeah.
And if it's security and safety, it will be in closed session, so even once they take the oath, they won't be part of that conversation.
Understood.
Okay.
Okay. So, moving on to 4.3, which we don't have Dr. Skinner here to be able to get necessarily a student handbook update, but I do know that you've been working with him.
Yeah, I
How we
can
looking?
provide you an update in terms
Okay.
of where I am. Dr. Skinner and I have met to discuss the student handbook, and I am in the process of finishing revisions on that. Now, I can tell you that one of the recommendations that I'll have is there's been the student handbook now includes the proposed student handbook now includes a significant discussion on the use of restorative practices as part of our discipline, and so I will certainly recommend that if this is what the direction that the board decides to go, and when I received the draft, it had significant discussion of restorative practices in it, so I'm making edits based upon the understanding that that's the direction that the district is moving. I'm not implying that that's my recommendation,
Right.
but that I'm making the edits. I'm certainly gonna recommend that, if that gets adopted, that the district do district-wide training on the use of restorative practices. If it's gonna be your policy to utilize that, then you wanna make sure that all of your building folks, teachers, on up, understand restorative practices and what that looks like.
Important to note that staff did receive training, there were teams of staff that received training, during the 2016 school year, and our secondary sites have continued to partner with the Center for Conflict Resolution, and they've received training as well. But additional training is always welcomed in terms of providing additional support to staff. But just in terms of, just for the record, wanting the board to understand and the committee to understand that staff have been trained in the area, but a refresher is always necessary, as well as new staff have been hired since that point.
Okay, well, thank you, because I was not aware of that, and that's why that was my recommendation. I didn't think that had occurred.
And,
Everybody's been trained?
well,
There were teams of staff that were trained.
The whole district, that's what, okay.
so in talking to Dr. Skinner,
He said,
well, in talking to Dr. Skinner has stated that people have been trained by CCR or Center of Conflict Resolution regarding restorative practices, but he is, in which he stated, and he did state this to me, that he wanted to find someone who, kind of piggybacking on what Carla was saying, finding someone who will train the district as a whole in the sense of the same philosophy as a whole. Because I know that we've had several different trainers with CCR, and we've had various other trainings that's been provided. But when we say district-wide, it's not the fact that the district has not been trained, but that it haven't not all been trained under the same umbrella.
and then also, if we could put in there the effective, I think that's coming up on this next one, the effective measures.
The effective measures.
How it is, if, how effective is it, we haven't really been able to see the effectiveness of how it is. And then also, man, that include, if, I know we're not gonna be able to see the student, but if, it's kinda like one of those people that came in, we wanna be able to track to see why that student is having that same crisis all the time. We won't be able to see it, but hopefully we'll have some type of thing to see why.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, if you're having this problem every day, we need to figure out something. We need to find out why, the whys. And I think that was something we had talked about the last time we were, last week sometime.
Within my discussions with Dr. Skinner, the effectiveness is you can measure the effectiveness based on its evidence-based practices, like the fact that it's districts that are utilizing it with full fidelity. Like I think I provided San Diego, San Francisco, and Chicago school districts who have more or less created a district-wide initiative, which, based on their effectiveness, there is ample material that shows the effectiveness of restorative practices. But also, in looking at those districts, what we also see is that they're all trained under the same umbrella. So we want to make sure that, in order to be able to measure our effectiveness, that we're also doing the same.
Because I think we're going on 6 years that we've really been involved in this, and I really would like to see the effectiveness in this district.
Right.
Not compared to, I understand what those other big districts is, because we had a chance to talk to the Q.
I will offer that the executive leadership team, post-implementation and post-training of teams in each of the buildings, we were able to show a decline in overall superintendent hearings, as well as when we looked at referrals and incidents by race specific to Black males. And so around this conversation around effectiveness, we have been able to demonstrate that over the course of the last 4 years.
In 2016 to 2017, the alternative school dropped from I think over 200 and something suspensions to 9.
Yeah, but the effectiveness in that wasn't good though. I'm just telling you the effect. I'm looking at, this is what I mean by effectiveness. Maybe, because I'm gonna keep it real with you guys.
No, elaborate.
At the same day, we like to use this BIS and restorative practices, but as adults, let's keep it real. Now, we know to a certain degree, it's so much restorative you're gonna be able to do it to me, because after a while, if I come and hit you in your face right about now, you and me, just fair game.
I think you misunderstand.
No, I'm just saying something. No, this is what happens every day. We have fights. All right, let's use the fight. And we're trying to I'm trying to keep it real. I'm trying to put us in a real thing. These are what, I'm just saying, this is what the teachers are dealing with, this type of behavior. You know,
this is-
cursing me out every day, you know, and we talking about restorative practice. I think, I look at this, to me, it's kind of like timeout when it was first, these child, and you like psychology, and I do too. Some things work for some kids to a certain degree. After you get too old, it's kind of like when you used to get a whooping. After a while, those spankings didn't hurt as you got older. And we have to look at this restorative practice maybe sometimes in that way. We talk about it.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah, go get that
No.
that thing.
The thing is that restorative practice is an option.
I
An
mean,
option for traditional standards of punishment.
I understand.
Not even so much as punishment, but
It's called timeout.
No,
Timeout.
you're missing the point.
But I'm just saying, let's
But-
just keep it real. Timeout.
No,
Restorative
we're
practice,
okay,
all in the
but
same.
I
But
want-
regardless, I'm just saying, let's try to look at that. And when I'm looking at the restorative practice, I'm looking at more of the teachers as a board that provides oversight. How can we have them to be able to create an atmosphere whereas they can learn, the kids can learn, teachers can sit there and don't have to keep on worrying about. If I tell you, the way it needs to be is, if John, no, I ain't gonna say Johnny because that's a normal name. If a student is sitting in my class and for 7 days out of hour and 30 minutes in the secondary, I think they go some of them an hour and 30 minutes, some of them longer than that, like they're in college. After a while, we all can't sit still after a while. That's the first thing. An hour and 30 minutes, that's a long time. Make a long story short.
Yeah, please
I keep
do.
on redirecting you every day, and I'm using these restorative practice, and then one day you just snap, and after a while, that's gonna get, how many restoratives do you need? That's what I guess I should ask.
Okay.
As much as that's gonna help you,
So-
just help me from the psychology part,
No.
psychological part, I mean.
So hold on a second. One, there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into restorative practice, but it is clear through your questioning that you kind of don't have a premise or understanding about it. So
Well, I understand it.
no. Mm-mm.
I just don't think that it's effective
I
everywhere.
think that we're out of our lane.
Yeah,
I think we are.
I think,
Yeah, we
guys,
are.
I mean, the
I
problem
think we are.
here
Yeah, I'm
Because
sorry.
is that
no, you're
we're
good.
definitely out of our lane because
Just
that
ask.
stuff falls totally under administration.
It falls under
Student
procedure.
The
service.
procedure, but the you have to, at the end of the day, board colleagues, I commend everyone on their passion. This is a very passionate board. But some of this stuff that we're discussing in the conversation that has come up today lies on the side of administration. We have to trust that that's what's been going on. These conversations are definitely getting off of what the policy is.
I'm sorry,
No, you're fine.
I retract all that.
But I'm gonna
And I
speak
want
to
you
what
to
she's
know,
saying too.
so.
The reason why that we're discussing, and he's right to actually have the discussion about restorative practice because it has to do with procedure, but the revision of the handbook is also a revision of the policy. So
But
when
where
we
are
look,
at on that?
but that's what she said. That's what she was saying was that
We're still working it, it's still a work
Still
in
a
progress.
working.
It's been working for a whole year.
Yeah, and he said,
Well, I've
will it
gotten
be,
the draft of the handbook. I'm making revisions to that draft now. I hope to have it to Dr. Skinner by end of business tomorrow,
will we get it at the board meeting?
with my changes. And then I think the plan was for it to go to educational accountability, for review. I think that's what Dr. Skinner indicated was the plan.
Yeah.
It was for it to go to educational accountability, and then once it passes there, it'll come to the full board.
right.
And you got off on this discussion, President Briggs, because you stepped out, because I had indicated that one of the things that I was going to be recommending is, because I had noticed a heavy focus on restorative practices and the revisions, recommending that district-wide training occur in restorative practices, and I was advised by Dr. Cargile that training has occurred, and so that's how you guys got into this discussion.
Yeah, and then we started talking about the effectiveness of it. Regardless, the point in which the only revision update that I'm the only reason why I'm speaking on restorative practices is based on the fact that it's going into the revisions, which will mirror the policy. So, knowing that it's going to the Education Accountability Committee for approval is pretty much what I needed to know. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, 4.4. Moving on. If there's no more discussion.
No, sir, Chair.
Okay. 4.4. policies regarding alternative education and transition planning for students. So this also has to do with more or less the handbook revisions, because it needs to be, as Carla's looking at the revisions of the handbook, it also needs to discuss how discipline plays out. So the one thing that the reason why this was left on was that I think it was important for us to be able to, as a board, ensure that our policies as far as discipline match what we're doing in the sense of the new alternative education building that we're providing. So for one, nowhere in our policy state anything about how we're going to do what policy backs up the procedure of the transition, or how they come back and forth, or how we're actually doing that. So what I'm posing is that in a future meeting, that after the handbook has been revised, and I'm pretty sure Dr. Skinner is already looking at this in the sense of how the alternative ed program plays into student discipline. But it's important for board members to also be aware of that as well, in the sense of there needs to be policy that matches the procedure. There can't be unwritten procedures when there's no policy.
And also throw in there too, also with that alternative setting, we need to make sure it's two descriptions of it. I might want to go to an alternative setting because I like the smaller setting, and I shouldn't be grouped with those same type of kids too that are over there doing something else. So I think we might need to also look at that too moving forward. Whereas we have kids that just like the alternative setting, and separating them from the ones that are there that are doing trying to do their transition back over.
Right.
Because then if you putting these two in together, you're making it.
But they're all our kids.
Yeah, I know they're all the kids, but
But
if I didn't do nothing wrong,
to clarify though, that's procedure.
well,
So,
yeah,
and I agree, that's
yeah, we need to
procedure.
make sure it's in there.
But the one thing we want to do is make sure that we have a policy that ensures that the procedure matches. Right now, the reason why I bring this up is because there's unwritten procedure because it's new.
And
It's
you
been
got
new
both.
for a year.
Yeah, you got both.
So when it comes to the procedure and how they play, I'm going to leave that to the administration to figure out. The one thing I want to do is make sure that we're supporting administration through what they want to see through procedure with policy. And right now, there's no policy.
Well, one of the things I must remind the board of is that the implementation of the alternative school is to sit within this first year, and what was stated once we moved towards a district alternative school is that this was going to have to be revisited, every year until those processes are all in place. And so it's not that they've been overlooked, it's just a matter of, it's a matter of revisiting what's needed so that Hickman Mills has its own charter school, moving from ombudsman to its own alternative school setting. So I understand that the policy needs to support the procedures that are being implemented, and that's something that should continuously be revisited during
And the reason why it's a topic of discussion is due to the handbook revision, which it's been a year. So that's all really as far as discussion I have on the topic.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any discussion on the topic?
I'm glad that everything is going to be in alignment.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right. Moving on to 5.1, which is future agenda items, which happens to deal with the MSBA policies coming to the full board for first meeting. That's kind of it.
Yes.
So, all right.
That process works really well when it comes to review then policy and then it goes to full board.
Yeah.
And we actually do have a 5.2.
Yeah, you had that.
We're going to take to the full board in April.
What is that?
No,
Yeah, I was like, wait.
That was 5.1.
We have a
5.0.
5.1 is MSBA policy revision, and then it was this committee's decision to take in April to the full.
Yes, you're absolutely right. April to the full board of the,
The security and,
yes, thank you, I'm sorry. The discussion of the open and closed campus, as far as when it comes to security.
And you put public information in there.
And we will,
And you put open and closed, you put public information, and you had, you might as well put the relations with all that money as well, group all in together.
well, no, I mean, that's actually more specifically looking at what safety, how we may amend policy for safety when it comes to how we address lockdowns, and we'll have to address it with how the crisis plan actually is going. But moving that to the full board, okay, thank you.
And
go
let me
ahead.
back up to your MSBA policy updates. I just wanna explain what I emailed out to you all, today. Were the MSBA, 2019 C updated policies. And so in keeping with how you all handled the revisions last month, you're getting those today, and being asked to review those over the next month and come to your policy committee meeting next month with questions, and discussion items that you all want to have on those policy updates. Dr. Cargile and I have met and gone over, the policies, and so now they're in your hands. And once you all have had your review, if you have questions in the interim, if you wouldn't mind emailing those questions to both Dr. Cargile and I, and we could try and have answers for you when you come to the policy meeting. But obviously we'll take, we wanna have that discussion next month. And then the next step will be to pass those to the full board at the April meeting for first review and at the May meeting for second review.
Okay.
One thing I didn't see in there, where was the, criminal background checks for board directors? What is that under?
It's in one of these little files.
It's under policies B, but like to be more
Talking about
specific,
GBEC,
no.
cause that's the only one I see,
Let me see if that's,
the school volunteer and all that.
No. Here.
Criminal background check, I'm looking at it now.
were you thinking that was in the MSB updates?
I don't know where it
I
was,
think
cause I know we had to do
It
it.
is.
Yeah, I mean,
MSBA updates.
okay, 'cause I know we did it, I don't know if everybody did it.
There's in the MSBA updates.
Yeah.
Alright.
So when you look at that,
Yeah,
I'm
we'll look at
glad
that.
I take mine.
All right, so we're moving on to, that, I didn't have it.
No, you're good. So moving on to future meeting dates, 6.1, March 4th, 2020, facilities
Cancelled. That was canceled.
committee meeting has been canceled.
Until further. Yeah, remember, he was sick.
He's sick.
yeah,
He's
but
sick.
I didn't know your decision.
I haven't had a chance to,
Oh, no problem.
send nothing out. I
So
will
are we-
send something out, and hopefully by next week we can get everybody.
Okay, so that's
Because we've been
on record as
prolonged.
canceled.
Yeah, it's canceled for the 4th though.
Okay,
For the facilities.
Yes,
For the
ma'am, because
facilities.
he was sick.
Thank you.
so March 9th, 2020, Education Accountability Committee meeting at 5 o'clock. April 7th, 2020, Policy Committee meeting at 5:30. March 12th, 2020, regular board meeting, regular session board meeting.
Forgot the bond thing,
Mhm.
the bond thing. Tomorrow, the bond.
Oh, as far as future meeting items?
No, for the bond update, that's tomorrow.
The community forum, March the
Community
5th.
forum is tomorrow.
The,
And,
yes, and I will say while looking at the camera, the March 5th, 2020 is the bond committee
the
forum.
community forum.
So if anybody from the community has any ideas as far as what they would like to see with this non-tax bond, non-tax meaning that it has nothing to do with any money that comes out of your pocket, please feel free to come to that. Tomorrow, I believe it starts at 5:30. 6 o'clock at Santa Fe.
And then you also sent out a Zoom for people who made the Zoom in.
Yes.
You said, am I the only one having that?
You're the only one that requested
okay.
it.
How you gonna?
I'm gonna be there. So, with that being said,
What did you say, March 4th is what?
March 5th.
5th,
No,
tomorrow.
but you were talking, you gave me the date of March 4th.
March 4th was the facility committee meeting that was canceled.
Because of
It's
this,
gonna be rescheduled.
it's gonna be rescheduled.
Yeah.
He's ill.
So, with that being said,
are you guys going into closed?
yeah, we're motioning. I'd like to motion, seek a motion to go into closed session.
We can't, we don't have four, we don't have a forum. We don't have a quorum.
We don't.
You-
No, then we're just gonna adjourn.
Yeah, you could adjourn.
Yeah, we're just gonna adjourn. And then,
And call a closed session meeting.
Yeah.
After that notice.
so, with that being said, the time is now 6:45. I'd like to call this meeting to adjournment.